6 days before the courtroom erupted, Nia Carter stepped off a Greyhound bus into the gritty sprawl of Stonehaven, a city of cracked sidewalks and flickering streetlights, her boots crunching gravel as she adjusted the strap of her worn leather jacket. At 39, she carried herself with the kind of quiet steel that didn't need a uniform to scream authority, her dark eyes scanning the unfamiliar streets with a predator's focus, her short-cropped hair tucked under a faded cap. She'd earned her stripes in bigger cities, climbing from beat cop to precinct legend, her record so clean it practically gleamed, a testament to 16 years of dodging bullets, both literal and bureaucratic. Now she was Stonehaven's first black female police chief, a title whispered about in barbershops and precinct locker rooms alike, though she hadn't officially started. Today she was incognito, jeans hugging her legs, jacket zipped to her chin, blending into the crowd to size up the department she'd been tapped to fix. Stonehaven PD had a reputation, the kind that clung like damp rot, complaints piling up. Like unpaid bills, officers shrugging off brutality claims with a wink and a nod. Nia wasn't here to play nice. She was here to gut the place and stitch it back together. But first she needed to see it raw, unfiltered, no brass polishing the truth for her arrival. The sun dipped low, painting the sky a bruised purple as Nia slipped into a corner booth at Millie's Diner, a greasy spoon wedged between a pawn shop and a laundromat, its neon sign buzzing faintly. She ordered coffee, black, no sugar, and pulled out a notebook, jotting observations from her morning walk through downtown. Graffiti spelling out slurs on a playground wall, a black kid eyeballing a patrol car like it was a coiled snake, the way folks crossed the street when uniforms rolled by. Her pen scratched the paper, each word a brick in the wall she'd built to shield this city from itself. She sipped the coffee, bitter as regret, and watched the room, cataloguing faces, the trucker nursing a beer, the waitress with a smoker's rasp, the old man muttering at his eggs. It was a snapshot of Stonehaven, weary and worn, a place that didn't trust its own shadow. Nia flipped the page, sketching a plan to hit the precinct tomorrow unannounced, to catch them off guard, see who flinched first. Outside, tires squealed as a black and white cruiser pulled up, its lights slicing through the diner's grimy windows. Nia glanced up, casual, clocking the officer stepping out, a broad-shouldered slab of a man, 42, buzz cut tight against his scalp, a jaw like a bulldog's, eyes hidden behind mirrored shades even as dusk settled in. Travis Hale, though she didn't know his name yet, just another badge in a city full of them, his duty belt creaking as he adjusted it, fingers brushing the holstered Glock like a nervous tick. He'd been on the force 19 years, a veteran, who wore his tenure like armor, his skin pale against the Navy uniform, a faint scar curling under his left ear from a bar fight he'd never admit losing. Travis didn't clock Nia as anything special, just a black woman in a booth. Her presence, prickling his radar the way a stray dog might. Something to watch, maybe chase off if it lingered too long. He strode past the diner, boots thudding, then doubled back, squinting through the glass. His gut telling him she didn't belong, not here, not in his Stonehaven. Nia caught the shift, the way his shoulders squared, the slow pivot as he pushed. Through the diner's door, bell jingling like a warning shot. She kept her head down, pen moving, but her pulse ticked up, years of instinct kicking in. Travis loomed over her table, shadow swallowing the light, his voice gravelly, laced with a drawl that didn't bother hiding its contempt. "You lost or just looking for trouble?" he asked, hands on his hips, badge glinting like a challenge. Nia lifted her gaze, steady, her face a mask of calm, though inside she was already mapping his weak spots, the way his weight leaned too heavy on his right leg, the twitch in his jaw when he didn't get an instant answer. "Just drinking coffee," she said, voice even, firm, no hint of the storm brewing behind her eyes. She slid the notebook shut, resting her hands on the table, open, non-threatening, but her spine stayed straight, unbowed. Travis snorted, a sound thick with disdain, his shades reflecting her image back at her, distorted, small. "Suspicious types hang around places like this," he said, stepping closer, his bulk crowding her space, the air turning sour with his breath, stale cigarettes and cheap mints. "What's your business here?" Nia tilted her head, meeting his stare through those mirrored lenses, her lips parting just enough to let the words slip out, sharp and deliberate. "What's your badge number, officer?" It wasn't a question. It was a line in the sand, and Travis felt it, the defiance, the refusal to shrink. His hand dropped to his belt, fingers curling, a reflex born from years of bending folks to his will. "I ask the questions," he snapped, voice rising, drawing eyes from the trucker, the waitress, the old man. All watching now, silent, waiting for the inevitable. Nia didn't flinch, didn't blink. Her calmer weapon, he didn't know how to counter. "I'm not breaking any laws," she said, each syllable a brick dropped between them, heavy, unyielding. "You got a reason to hassle me, or you just picking fights?" Travis's face reddened, a flush creeping up his neck, his control slipping like sand through his fist. He didn't need a reason. Not really, not in his mind, where skin color was probable cause enough, where Stonehaven's unspoken rules gave him carte blanche to shove, to scare, to remind. "Step outside," he barked, grabbing her arm, yanking her up, coffee spilling across the table, dark streaks soaking her notebook. Nia stumbled, caught herself, her free hand balling into a fist she forced open. Not yet. Not here. The diner went still, forks clattering, breaths held. As Travis hauled her toward the door, her boots dragging against the chipped linoleum. Out in the cooling dusk, he spun her around, slamming her chest first against his cruiser, the metal cold. Against her ribs, her cheek pressed to the hood as he twisted her arms back, cuffs snapping tight around her wrists. "Non-compliance," he muttered, loud enough for the gawkers gathering across the street, a dozen faces peering from the laundromat. Phones creeping out to record. Though none dared step closer, Nia's lips split against the hood, blood trickling warm down her chin, but her eyes burned, locked on the diner's flickering sign as Travis patted her down, rough, invasive, his hands lingering where they didn't need to. Should have answered. "Me," he growled, stepping back, satisfied, his smirk curling like smoke as he yanked her upright, shoving her toward the cruiser's open door. "Maybe a night in lockup will teach you some respect." She didn't resist, didn't give him the satisfaction. Her silence a blade sharper than any shout. Blood dripped onto her jacket, staining the leather, as he pushed her into the back seat, the door slamming shut with a thud that echoed down the block. Travis climbed in front, radio crackling as he called it in. Picked up a troublemaker resisting, bringing her in, his voice smug, oblivious to the storm he'd just unleashed. Nia sat still, wrists chafing against the cuffs, her mind racing, cataloguing every move, every word, every witness. He didn't know who she was, didn't know the title she carried, the power she'd wielded in cities twice this size. To him she was just another black face to grind under his boot, another notch in his belt, another story to laugh about over beers with the boys. But Nia wasn't just anyone, she was the new chief. And this wasn't a stop, it was the spark. That'd burn his world to ash. The cruiser rolled through Stonehaven's darkening streets, headlights cutting through the gloom, past pawn shops and boarded-up storefronts. The city watching in silence as Travis drove, humming to himself, "Aye, man secure in his petty kingdom." Nia leaned her head against the window, glass cool against her bruised cheek, her breath fogging the pain as she stared out, plotting, planning, her fury coiling tight like a spring. She'd walked into Stonehaven to fix it, to root out the rot, and here it was, sitting right in front of her, steering the wheel with a grin. Travis thought he'd won, thought he'd taught her a lesson, but he'd just handed her the match to light the fire. 6 days from now, that courtroom would quake, and this moment, this spark, would be the reason why. The precinct hummed with the low drone of fluorescent lights as Nia Carter sat in a holding cell, her wrists still raw from Travis Hale's cuffs, the metallic tang of blood lingering on her split lip. It was past midnight, the air thick with the stale scent of sweat and coffee, when a clerk, a wiry kid named Jamal with a nervous twitch, shuffled in, clutching a clipboard. He squinted at her ID, fished from her jacket pocket after the diner fiasco, then froze, his eyes ballooning as the name clicked, Nia Carter, Chief of Police, Stonehaven PD. His pen clattered to the floor, rolling under the bench as he bolted. Out, sneakers squeaking on the chipped tile. Minutes later, the cell door swung open, a sergeant with a greying mustache barking at her to follow, His voice clipped, tight, like he'd just swallowed glass. Nia stood, slow and deliberate, brushing dirt off her jeans, her bruised cheek throbbing but her posture unyielding, a tower of quiet fury in the chaos she'd already begun to stir. They marched her to a briefing room, a cramped box with peeling paint and a flickering bulb where Travis Hale slouched against the wall, arms crossed, his buzz cut casting jagged shadows on the plaster. His mirrored shades were off now, revealing cold grey eyes that narrowed as Nia stepped in, her leather jacket creaking, blood crusted on her chin like war paint. The sergeant cleared his throat, gravelly and awkward, muttering about a mix-up, his gaze darting between them like a trapped rat. "Officer Hale, you're to apologize," he said, the words tasting sour as they hit the air. Travis's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching under his scar, his fists curling like he'd rather swing than speak. Nia locked eyes with him, her stare ablaze, daring him to choke on it. He straightened, boots scuffing the floor, and forced out a grunt that barely passed for words. "Sorry, ma'am, didn't know who you were," he said, his tone dripping with venom, each syllable a lie she could smell from across the room. She nodded once, sharp, her lips curling into a smile that cut deeper than any shout, a promise he didn't yet understand. She thought she'd won, thought this was the first crack in his armor, the first step to dismantling the rot he embodied. The sergeant hustled her out, mumbling about paperwork, leaving Travis simmering in the briefing room, his breath hissing through clenched teeth. Nia walked free, the night air cool against her bruised skin as she stepped onto the precinct steps, her mind already spinning plans, audits, ways to bury him in his own filth. She'd caught him off guard, flipped his power play into a public stumble, and for a fleeting moment she felt the tide turning, the city bending to her will. She hailed a cab, sliding into the back seat, her notebook still damp with spilled coffee but intact, her resolve hardening like steel in a forge. The driver, a grizzled man with a smoker's cough, glanced at her in the rear view, asking if she'd had a rough night. "Just getting started," she said, her voice low, steady, a vow to herself as the cab rolled toward her rented duplex on the edge of town. She leaned back, closing her eyes, imagining Travis squirming, his smugness crumbling under the weight of her title, her presence, her fight. But Travis wasn't squirming. Not yet. Across town, he slammed through the door of the Rusty Anchor, a dive bar stinking of spilled beer and regret, its neon sign flickering like a dying pulse. He slid onto a stool, the wood creaking under his bulk, and waved over Officer Luke Grayson, a lanky 28-year-old with a patchy beard and a nervous laugh, always trailing Travis like a shadow. Luke nursed a whiskey, his eyes darting. As Travis leaned in, voice a low growl, the bar's jukebox droning some twangy tune about lost love. "Can you believe this crap?" Travis spat, snatching Luke's glass and downing it, the burn fueling his rage. "Some black chick waltzes in, gets a fancy title, and I'm supposed to kiss her boots? Quota's ruining the force, man." Luke shifted, uneasy, his fingers tapping the bar, but he didn't argue, didn't dare. He'd seen Travis snap before, seen him shove a rookie's head into a locker for less, and he wasn't about to test that line. "She's just one woman," Luke mumbled, weak, a shrug in his voice. Travis's grin twisted, cruel, his scar stretching as he leaned closer. "One woman too many," he said, slamming the glass down, the crack loud enough to turn heads. "She'll learn her place." The bar clock ticked past 2, the last drunk stumbling out as Travis hatched his plan, his words slurring but his intent razor-sharp. Luke nodded along, half drunk, half scared, as Travis mapped out a payback that'd sting deeper than any apology. By dawn, Nia woke to a text from her landlord. "Trouble at your place, come quick." She bolted upright, adrenaline spiking, and grabbed her jacket. The cab ride back a blur of red lights and honking horns. She arrived at her duplex, a squat brick building on a street of sagging porches, and froze. Her office window gaped open. Glass jagged like teeth, a brick lying in the wreckage of her desk. Papers scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. Spray painted in red, bold and dripping, were the words, "Go home." The letters slashing across her walls, her chair, her life. She stepped inside, glass crunching under her boots, her breath catching as she saw her notebook, coffee-stained pages torn, flung into the corner like trash. The precinct sent a patrol, 2 uniforms who barely glanced at the mess, a white cop, with a paunch and a black rookie who wouldn't meet her eyes. "Probably kids," the older one said, shrugging, his pen hovering over a notepad he didn't bother filling. "Happens around here." Nia's fists clenched, nails biting her palms, her voice ice as she pointed at the paint. "Kids don't write ultimatums," she said, but they just shuffled, muttered about filing a report, and peeled off in their cruiser, tires spitting gravel. She stood alone in the wreckage, the morning sun glaring through the broken window, her victory from the night before souring fast. This wasn't a prank, it was a declaration, a line drawn in blood-red paint, and she knew whose hand held the can. Travis hadn't bowed, he'd struck back, harder, uglier, turning her moment of triumph into a warning she couldn't ignore. She salvaged what she could, stacking papers, wiping paint smears with a rag, her mind racing as the neighborhood woke around her, kids shouting, cars rumbling past. She'd thought the apology was a win, a crack she could widen, but it was a feint, a distraction while he sharpened his knife. Stonehaven wasn't just broken, it was a machine built to crush her, and Travis was its grinning cog. She sank into her ruined chair, the springs groaning, and stared at the graffiti, the words pulsing like a heartbeat. This was war now, personal, brutal, and she'd have to fight dirty to win. Her phone buzzed, a precinct number, probably the sergeant with some half-baked excuse, but she let it ring, her eyes locked on that red scrawl, her resolve hardening into something unbreakable. "So what do you think? Was Nia right to hold her ground in that briefing room, or should she have flashed her title sooner to shut Travis down? Comment number 1 if you think she's playing it smart, staying cool under fire. And hit like and subscribe to catch how this showdown explodes next. Or comment number 2 if you reckon she's letting him dig his own grave too slow, risking more than she can handle. Either way, stick around because Travis isn't done swinging. What's his next move when Nia starts digging into his dirt? Nia Carter stood in her wrecked duplex office, the morning sun slicing through the broken window, glinting off the jagged glass scattered across the floor. The red paint spelling "Go Home" dripped down the wall, a taunt she couldn't scrub away, her torn notebook lying in the corner like a wounded bird. She kicked aside a shard of brick, her boots crunching the debris, and pulled her phone from her jacket pocket, ignoring the precinct's buzzing calls. She wasn't waiting for their excuses. She was done playing defense. By noon, she strode into Stonehaven PD's headquarters, a squat concrete fortress on the city's north side, her leather jacket swapped for a crisp blazer, her bruised lip a stark contrast to the polished brass of her new chief's badge pinned to her chest. She bypassed the front desk, her steps echoing on the scuffed linoleum, and headed straight for the records room, a basement lair of flickering lights and moldy file cabinets. She'd come to gut the beast, and Travis Hale was her starting point. She yanked open a drawer, dust puffing into the air, and pulled his file, a thick stack of yellowed pages that smelled like old coffee and regret. 16 complaints in 19 years, each one a ghost story. Excessive force, racial slurs, a black teen with a busted jaw, a grandmother shoved into a snowbank, all stamped unsubstantiated in red ink, buried under layers of bureaucratic quicksand. Nia's fingers tightened on the folder, her pulse thudding as she traced the pattern, a map of a man who'd turned his badge into a bludgeon. She needed an ally, someone inside who'd talk, so she tapped Lieutenant Maya Torres, a 35-year-old Latina with a buzz cut and a rep for keeping her nose clean. Maya met her in a break room, the air thick with burnt popcorn. Her dark eyes wary but sharp as she leaned against a vending machine, arms crossed over her navy uniform. "You're stirring a hornet's nest," Maya said, voice low, her accent clipping the words as Nia slid Travis's file across the table, pages fanning out like a deck of losing cards. "I want the truth," Nia replied, her tone steel, her bruised cheek twitching as she pointed at a complaint from 3 years back, a kid named Dion, 17, claiming Travis cracked his skull for looking wrong. Maya hesitated, her fingers brushing the paper, then nodded, a flicker of resolve breaking through her caution. "There's a tape," she whispered, glancing at the door. Deon's mom recorded him confessing it, off-duty, bragging at a bar. It's in evidence. Lock up, but it's buried deep. Nia's chest tightened, a spark of hope flaring as she followed Maya to the lockup, a steel vault in the precinct's guts, its shelves groaning under boxes of forgotten sins. They found it after an hour, a microcassette tucked in a mislabeled envelope, the label smudged but the date clear. April 12, 3 years ago. Nia plugged it into a dusty player, static crackling before Travis's voice slithered out, slurred with whiskey, smug as sin. Kid thought he could stare me down, so I showed him pavements harder than his head, he laughed, a clink of glass punctuating the boast. Nia's jaw clenched, her nails digging into her palms as Maya shifted beside her, unease creeping into her stance. This could sink him, Nia said, ejecting the tape, her mind racing with visions of Travis in cuffs, his smirk wiped clean. But Maya's voice cut through, sharp, hesitant. You sure about this? He's got friends, Nia, high up. You push this. It's not just him you're fighting. Nia met her gaze unflinching. I'm not here to tiptoe, she said, pocketing the tape, her resolve a fortress Maya couldn't breach. That night, Nia locked the tape in her duplex safe, a rusted box bolted to her closet floor, her son Jamal asleep down the hall, his soft snores a reminder of why she couldn't flinch. She sat on her couch, the springs creaking, replaying the tape in her head, thinking she'd finally pinned Travis to the wall. She'd brief the captain tomorrow, force an investigation, watch the dominoes fall. But at 3 in the morning her phone jolted her awake, Maya's name flashing on the screen. It's gone, Maya said, voice trembling, a siren wailing, faintly in the background. I tipped off Captain Reese, thought he'd back us, but he pulled the tape from lockup, said it's too hot, could torch the whole precinct. Nia bolted upright, heart slamming against her ribs, her safe key cold in her hand as she checked, the tape still there, her copy safe. You sold me out, she hissed, betrayal slicing through her like a blade. Maya stammered, I was scared. Nia, for my kids, my pension. But the line went dead, leaving Nia alone in the dark, her ally turned traitor. By dawn, Travis strutted into her office, his boots thudding on the hardwood she'd swept clean of glass, his grin wide enough to swallow the room. He leaned against her desk, knocking over a stack of files, his grey eyes glinting with malice. As he towered over her, his bulk a wall of menace. Heard you've been digging, he said, voice a low rumble, his scar twitching as he smirked. Find anything good? Nia stood, her blazer crisp despite the sleepless night, her bruised lip a badge of defiance as she stared him down, the tape's weight in her pocket a secret he didn't know she still held. Enough to bury you, she said, bluffing, testing. Him. But his laugh boomed, a sound that rattled the walls. Keep dreaming, Chief, he sneered, turning to leave, his parting shot a dare she couldn't ignore. Check the news. She flicked on her phone, the screen glowing with a local. Headline, Chief or Criminal. The grainy photo from the diner stared back, her face pressed to Travis's cruiser hood, blood streaking her cheek, captioned with venom, New Chief caught in violent arrest. Her stomach dropped, the room spinning as she scrolled, comments piling. Up, racist bile flooding the thread. She doesn't belong here, send her back. She clicked the source, a blog run by a cop groupie, the timestamp fresh, posted an hour ago. Travis hadn't just dodged her. He'd weaponized her own fight, turned her victory into a public flogging. She sank into her chair, the paint smears, still faintly visible on the wall, her breath shallow as the betrayal sank in. Maya's cowardice had cracked her armor, and Travis had kicked the door wide open. She replayed the night in her mind, Maya's shaky voice, the captain's invisible hand snatching her evidence, Travis's smug stride as he'd left. The precinct wasn't just protecting him, it was a machine grinding her down, and she'd trusted the wrong cog. Her fingers brushed the tape in her pocket, her last ace, but now it felt fragile, a spark in a storm she couldn't control. She'd thought she could lean on Maya, thought she'd found a crack to widen, but the rot ran deeper, a web of silence. And fear Travis thrived in. The news app buzzed, a push alert, Chief Carter under fire as past complaints surface, lies spun from thin air, his fingerprints all over it. She stood, pacing the office, her boots kicking up dust, her mind racing, as the city turned against her. This wasn't a setback, it was a declaration, and Travis was just getting started. Nia Carter woke to the buzz of her phone, the screen ablaze with notifications, each one a dagger twisting deeper into the wound Travis Hale had carved. The chief or criminal? Headline glared back, her bloodied face plastered across Stonehaven's digital underbelly, comments piling up like vultures on a corpse. She rolled out of bed, her duplex still reeking of paint thinner from the vandalism, her bruised lip throbbing as she pulled on a tailored grey suit, the fabric crisp against her skin, a shield for the war she was about to wage. Travis had dragged her into court over the diner stop, claiming she'd swung at him, a lie so bold it stank of desperation. She grabbed her keys, the tape of his confession still tucked in her blazer pocket, her last bullet if it came to that, and drove to the courthouse, a looming brick beast on the city's west side, its steps slick with morning dew. The courtroom buzzed like a hive, wooden benches groaning under the weight of onlookers, reporters scribbling in notebooks, their pens scratching like claws. Nia strode in, head high, her boots clicking on the polished floor, her suit a stark contrast to the rumpled uniforms of the cops dotting the crowd, their whispers trailing her like smoke. Travis sat at the plaintiff's table, his buzz cut gleaming under the fluorescent lights, his grey eyes locked on her with a smirk that promised blood. He wore his dress blues, badge polished to a mirror shine, a predator playing victim for the gallery. The judge, a wiry man with a hawkish nose and a gavel that looked too big for his hand, called order, his voice a dry rasp as he peered over wire-rimmed glasses. "Officer Hale alleges assault," he said, flipping through papers. "Claims—" Chief Carter resisted arrest and struck him. "Let's hear it." Travis took the stand, his boots thudding as he swaggered up, oath rolling off his tongue like a rehearsed line. "She was loitering outside Millie's diner," he said, voice steady, a liar's polish on every word. "I asked for ID, she got mouthy, swung at me when I tried to cuff her. Had to take her down." He leaned back, arms crossed, his scar twitching as he dared Nia to call him out. She stood, her blazer rustling, her bruised cheek a silent rebuttal, as she faced him, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "That's a fabrication," she said, calm, lethal, her eyes never leaving his. "I asked for his badge number, he slammed me against his cruiser, cuffed me without cause, witnesses saw it." She pointed to the gallery where the trucker from the diner shifted, his cap pulled low, avoiding her gaze. The judge squinted, tapping his pen as Nia laid out her side, her words precise, a surgeon dissecting a corpse. "I'm the new chief, appointed 6 days ago. Officer Hale didn't know, didn't care, just saw a black woman he could bully." The room stirred, murmurs rippling like a stone in a pond, but Travis's smirk didn't falter, his confidence a wall she couldn't crack yet. She thought the truth would shine, that the judge would see the rot in his story, the absurdity of a chief assaulting a cop unprovoked. The gavel hovered, the judge's lips pursing as he weighed her words, Travis's lies, the air thick with anticipation. "Insufficient evidence of assault," he said finally, his voice flat, "but resisting arrest holds. $50 fine, case closed." The gavel banged, a hollow thud, and Nia exhaled, a flicker of relief sparking in her chest. She dodged the worst, kept her record clean, or so she thought. She turned to leave, the finer slap she could shrug off, her mind already on the tape, the next move to bury Travis. But the door flew open, Captain Reese bursting in, his face pale as ash, sweat beading on his brow as he shoved through the crowd. "Wait!" he barked, voice cracking, his uniform rumpled like he'd sprinted from the precinct. "She's the new chief, Your Honor. Hale arrested his own boss." The room erupted, gasps and shouts bouncing off the walls, reporters scrambling, pens flying as the judge's glasses slipped down his nose, his mouth gaping like a fish. Travis froze, his smirk vanishing, his hands clenching the table's edge as if it'd hold him up. Nia stood still, her bruised lip curling into a faint, cold smile, her eyes drilling into him as the truth hit like a freight train. She'd walked. Free humiliated him in front of the city, and for a heartbeat she felt the ground shift, the power tipping her way. The judge stammered, banging the gavel again, dismissing the case entirely. The fine erased in the chaos as Travis stumbled back, red-faced, his grey eyes darting like a trapped animal's. Nia stepped out, the courthouse steps cool under her. Boots, the morning sun glaring as she breathed deep, thinking she'd crushed him, snapped his spine in front of Stonehaven. She'd won, hadn't she? The precinct would have to back her now, Travis's stunt too public to bury. She slid into her car, the leather seat creaking, her phone buzzing with texts from Jamal. "You okay, Mom?" She typed back, better than ever, her fingers steady, her chest light with the first real hope since she'd hit town. She turned the key, the engine rumbling, ready to hit the precinct and hammer the audit home. But Travis wasn't done, not by a mile. By dusk, her phone lit up again, a notification from a local news app, her heart sinking as she tapped it. A video screamed across the screen. Chief Carter attacks officer in violent clash, the footage grainy but damning. Her face pressed to the cruiser hood, then a cut, a jerky edit showing her spinning, fist raised, Travis ducking like she'd swung. Her stomach churned, bile rising as she watched, the diner scene twisted into a lie, her assault looping for thousands to see. The comments flooded in, vicious, unrestrained. "She's a thug, not a chief. Stonehaven doesn't need this trash." She slammed her phone down, the screen cracking, her breath ragged as the truth hit. Travis's pals had doctored it, flipped her win into a nightmare, turned the city against her in hours. She paced her duplex, the paint smears mocking her. The tape in her pocket useless now, drowned out by the viral venom. The courthouse had been a stage, her victory a mirage, and Travis had snatched it back, his counterattack a sledgehammer to her gut. She'd thought she'd pinned him, thought the captain's reveal would end it. But he'd played the long game, let her bask before he struck. Her phone buzzed again. A news alert. Public demands chief's resignation. The mayor's office silent, the precinct radio quiet. She sank onto the couch, the springs groaning, her bruised lip pulsing as she stared at the ceiling, the weight of Stonehaven crashing down. Travis wasn't just fighting, he was rewriting her story, and she'd underestimated how far he'd go. "What do you reckon? Did Nia play it right by letting the courtroom unfold, banking on the truth? Or should she have dropped the tape then and there to torch Travis's lies? Comment number 1, if you think she's still got the upper hand, holding her cards close. And hit like and subscribe to see how she claws back from this mess. Or comment number 2 if you figure she's too trusting, letting him spin the web too tight. Either way, how's she going to dodge the mob when the streets turn on her next? Nia Carter slumped on her duplex couch, the springs creaking under her weight, the cracked phone screen glowing with the viral video's lies, her supposed attack on Travis Hale looping like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. The clock ticked past midnight, Stonehaven's streets humming outside, a restless pulse she felt in her bones. She rubbed her bruised lip, the taste of blood faint but persistent, her gray suit crumpled from the courthouse chaos, still clinging to her frame. The tape in her blazer pocket pressed against her chest, a fragile lifeline drowned out by the city's roar, the public's rage fueled by Travis's doctored footage. She stood, pacing the living room, the paint smears from the vandalism glaring, under the dim lamp when her phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. "Check your doorstep." Her pulse spiked, her boots thudding as she crossed to the front door, flinging it open to find a folded paper scrawled in black marker. "You're done, Chief." Her address, her sanctuary, leaked online, a gift from Travis's venomous whispers. She slammed the door, locking it, her breath shallow as she peered through the blinds, the street dark save for the flicker of a distant streetlight. Then it came, a low rumble growing louder, tires screeching, voices rising like a storm rolling. In headlights blazed through the window, blinding her as a pickup truck swerved onto her lawn, gravel spitting under its wheels. Figures spilled out, shadows in hoodies and ball caps, their shouts cutting through the night, raw and guttural. "Get out! You don't belong here!" Glass shattered as a bottle smashed against her duplex, amber liquid streaking the brick, the stench of cheap beer seeping inside. Nia bolted to Jamal's room, her 16-year-old son sprawled across his bed, headphones blasting rap, oblivious, until she yanked them off, his brown eyes wide with confusion. "Downstairs now," she snapped, her voice a whip, dragging him to the living room as more bottles rained down, shards exploding across the floor. The mob swelled. A dozen, then 20, faces twisted with hate, fists clutching bricks and bats. Their chants a jagged chorus of slurs that clawed at her skin. "Thug chief, go back where you came from." A rock punched through the front window, glass spraying like shrapnel, and Jamal ducked, his lanky frame hunching as Nia shoved him behind the couch. She grabbed a baseball bat from the closet, its wood chipped from his little league days, her grip tight as she faced the chaos, her bruised lip curling into a snarl. "Stay low," she hissed, her eyes locked on the door as it rattled under a heavy kick, the frame groaning but holding. She dialed 911, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. "Officer under attack, 2030 Elm Street, Sendai." "Back up now." The dispatcher's reply crackled. "Units dispatched." But the line went dead, static, swallowing her hope. A Molotov cocktail sailed through the broken window, flames licking the curtains as it shattered on the floor, fire blooming. Fast, acrid smoke stinging her lungs. Nia lunged, stomping it out with her boots, embers scorching the soles, her blazer singed as she shielded Jamal, his coughs ragged behind her. The mob pressed closer, a brick slamming into the wall inches from her head, plaster crumbling as their screams grew feral. She swung the bat at the next figure breaching the door, a wiry man in a red cap, his eyes wild as he charged, bottle raised. The wood cracked against his arm, a sickening snap echoing as he howled, stumbling back. But another took his place, a hulking brute with a bat of his own, swinging for her skull. Nia ducked, the air whistling above her, and drove her shoulder into his gut, sending him crashing into the splintered frame, his weapon clattering to the porch. She fought like a cornered beast, her swings precise, brutal, years of training surging through her veins as she repelled them, one by one, their curses drowned by the roar in her ears. Jamal huddled behind her, his breath sharp, terrified as she held the line, thinking she'd outlast them, that backup would crash through any second. The mob thinned, some retreating to the truck, others nursing busted limbs, their fury faltering. As she stood tall, bat dripping with sweat, her duplex a war zone of shattered glass and smouldering ash. She panted, chest heaving, the night air cool against her scorched skin, believing she'd won, that she'd turned the tide against Travis's pawns. Then sirens wailed, distant at first, growing louder, a lifeline she clung to as the last stragglers fled, tires squealing into the dark. 2 squad cars screeched up, lights flashing red and blue, bathing the wrecked lawn in a surreal glow. Nia dropped the bat, raising her hands, her voice hoarse as she shouted, "Chief Carter, I called this in." But the cops didn't hesitate, 4 uniforms piling out, guns drawn, their faces hard, unfamiliar. "On the ground," the lead barked, a stocky white officer with a buzz cut not unlike Travis's, his Glock steady as he advanced. Nia froze, disbelief crashing over her, her bruised lip twitching as she stepped forward, hands still up. "I'm the victim here, check the call log," she said, but they didn't listen, didn't care. The second cop, a wiry kid with a nervous twitch, grabbed her arms, twisting them back, cuffs snapping tight as he shoved her face first into the dirt, gravel biting her cheek. Jamal yelled, lunging from the couch, "She's the chief, let her go." But a third cop tackled him, pinning his lanky frame to the porch, his cries muffled as they zip-tied his wrists. Nia struggled, her blazer tearing at the shoulder, her voice raw as she spat, "This is a setup, you know who I am." The lead cop smirked, his badge glinting. Officer Grayson, the name clicking in her mind, Luke from the bar, Travis's shadow. "Inciting violence," he said, loud enough for the neighbors peeking through curtains, their phones out, recording her downfall. "You're under arrest, Chief." Travis leaned against a squad car, his grin wide, predatory, his grey eyes glinting as he watched, arms crossed, the puppet master savoring his show. They hauled her up, her boots dragging as they shoved her, into the cruiser, the door slamming with a thud that echoed in her skull. Jamal thrashed, his zip ties cutting into his skin, but they tossed him in beside her, his face streaked with tears and fury. The mob's wreckage faded as the car rolled. Out, glass crunching under tires, the neighbors' whispers a dull roar in her ears. She'd fought them off, held her ground, thought she'd won a brutal victory, but Travis had flipped it, turned her defense into a crime, her own force his weapon. The cuffs bit deeper, her bruised lip pulsing, her mind racing as the precinct loomed ahead, a concrete trap she'd walked into blind. Travis hadn't just struck back, he'd rigged the game, and she was the prey now, bleeding in his cage. Nia Carter sat in Stonehaven PD's lockup, the cold steel bench biting into her thighs, her grey suit torn at the shoulder, cuffs chafing her wrists as the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like a swarm of angry wasps. Jamal slumped beside her, his zip ties swapped for metal bracelets, his lanky frame hunched, his brown eyes darting between the bars and her bruised face, fear etching lines where teenage defiance usually lived. The cell stank of bleach and despair, the walls scarred, with scratched initials, a testament to the souls chewed up by this place. Officer Luke Grayson had booked her with a smirk. "Inciting violence," he'd said, his voice dripping with Travis Hale's venom. The paperwork stamped fast, no questions, no rights read, just a shove into this concrete cage. Nia's lip throbbed, blood crusted on her chin, but her mind was a furnace burning through the chaos, plotting her next strike. She leaned close to Jamal, her voice a whisper, sharp and steady despite the ache in her ribs from the mob's blows. "We're getting out," she said, her eyes scanning the cell block, clocking the inmates, 5 women in orange jumpsuits sprawled across benches, their faces hard but curious. Jamal nodded, his breath shaky, trusting her like always, even here. Nia spotted a burner phone, a cheap flip model tucked in the waistband of a wiry inmate with braids, her name stitched on her uniform, Tasha. Nia caught her gaze, a silent deal struck in the flicker of a glance, and Tasha slid the phone over, her fingers quick, practiced. "Heard you're the chief," Tasha muttered, voice low, her braids swinging as she leaned back, casual like this was routine. "Make it quick." Nia palmed the device, her heart pounding as she flipped it open, the screen glowing dim in the shadows. She didn't call a lawyer, didn't waste time on protocol. She dialed a live stream app, her fingers trembling but precise, syncing it to a public feed she'd used in her old precinct for transparency drills. The signal flickered, weak but it held, and she angled the phone, her bruised face filling the frame as she spoke, voice raw, unfiltered. "This is Nia Carter, Stonehaven's police chief, locked up by my own force. Officer Travis Hale sent a mob to my home, burned it, attacked my son. I fought back, and they cuffed me for it." She panned to Jamal, his zip tie marks red and angry, then to the cell, the inmates watching, some nodding, their own scars a chorus to her story. "He's brutalized this city for years, 16 complaints buried, a tape of him bragging about cracking a kid's skull. This is what they protect." Her words echoed off the bars, a grenade lobbed into the night, and she hit send, the feed blasting live to thousands. The cell block stirred, Tasha smirking, another inmate whistling low as the phone buzzed with incoming. Views, the numbers climbing fast, 500, 1,000, 5,000 in minutes. Nia shoved the phone back to Tasha, her chest tight, hope flaring as she imagined Stonehaven waking to this, the truth cutting through Travis's lies. By dawn, the precinct rattled with noise, boots stomping, radios crackling as the live stream exploded online. Hashtags like "Tauta Free Chief Carter" trending, protesters flooding the streets outside, their chants seeping through the thick walls. "Justice now." Nia stood, her torn suit a badge of war, her bruised lip curling as the cell door clanked open. A sergeant with sweat-soaked pits barking, "Carter, out! Mayor's orders." Jamal stumbled after her, his wrists freed, his eyes wide with relief. As they shuffled into the precinct lobby, the air electric with chaos. She strode out, head high, the morning sun blinding as she hit the steps, protesters roaring, signs bobbing like waves, "Hail must fall" scrawled in bold red. News vans lined the curb, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions she ignored, her focus razor-sharp. Travis was reeling, his frame-up shattered by her voice, her fight. She'd turned the tide, flipped his trap into a citywide uprising, her release of victory carved from the ashes of her duplex. She hugged Jamal tight, his thin frame trembling against her, and whispered, "We're okay," believing it, tasting the win as the crowd's energy surged around her. She'd cracked the precinct's shell, exposed its rot, and Travis's smirk would be dust by noon, or so she thought, her boots steady on the pavement, her torn blazer flapping in the breeze. Then it happened. A crack splitting the air, sharp and final, a sniper's bullet grazing her shoulder, tearing through her blazer, blood blooming hot and wet as she staggered, pain searing her arm. The crowd screamed, scattering. Jamal yanking her down behind a parked car, his voice a panicked shout. "Mom!" Nia clutched her shoulder, crimson seeping through her fingers, her breath ragged as she scanned the rooftops, a glint of metal, winking from a tenement 3 blocks off. Cops swarmed, late, useless, their shouts drowned by the ringing in her ears as she pressed against the car, gravel cutting her knees. Her shell casing clinked to the pavement nearby, brass glinting in the sun, and an officer bagged it, his gloves trembling as he muttered, "Hale's Prince, no way." Travis's alibi hit fast, Luke Grayson jogging up, panting. "He was with me patrolling Southside, logged it an hour ago." Nia's vision blurred, pain pulsing, but her mind snapped clear, piecing it together. Travis had struck again, lethal this time. His prints a taunt or a plant, his alibi too clean, too quick. She'd walked free, rallied the city, thought she'd won a brutal round, but he'd turned her triumph into a kill shot, his shadow stretching longer, deadlier. Medics rushed her, bandages slapping over the wound. Jamal's hand gripping hers as they loaded her into an ambulance, sirens wailing. She stared out the window, the protesters' signs fading, Travis's grin haunting her from the squad car. 3 days ago, a promise kept. He hadn't just fought back, he'd aimed to bury her, and she'd underestimated the depth of his hate, the reach of his claw. So, what's your take? Did Nia's live stream gamble pay off? Proving she's tougher than Travis's traps, or was it a reckless move that painted a bigger target on her back? Comment number 1 if you think she's still the hunter, turning his game against him. And smash that like and subscribe to see if she can dodge his next blow. Or comment number 2 if you reckon she's in over her head, pushing too hard, too fast. Either way, how's she going to hit back when the audit becomes her last stand? Nia Carter lay on a gurney in Stonehaven General's ER, the antiseptic sting biting her nose as medics stitched the sniper's graze on her shoulder, crimson soaking the gauze, her grey suit in tatters around her arm. Jamal sat beside her, his lanky frame hunched in a plastic chair, his brown eyes locked on her, fear simmering beneath his silence. The bullet had missed her artery by inches, a near miss that throbbed with every heartbeat, but her mind wasn't on the pain. It was on Travis Hale, his prints on that shell casing, his alibi too slick to trust. She'd walked out of lockup a hero, the live stream shattering his frame up, protesters chanting her name, but he'd flipped it again, turned her triumph into a bleeding wound. Discharged by noon, she swapped the hospital gown for a fresh blazer, the bandage bulky under the fabric, and drove straight to the precinct, her shoulder stiff but her resolve ironclad. She wasn't limping away, she was charging back. The precinct buzzed with tension, officers whispering in corners, their eyes darting as she strode in, her boots echoing on the linoleum, her bruised lip a stark badge of war. She called an emergency meeting, commandeering the conference room, its long table scarred from years of coffee rings and fist slams. She stood at the head, her voice cutting through the stale air. Full audit now. Every officer, every file, starting with Travis Hale. The room shifted, sergeants and lieutenants exchanging glances, some nodding, others stiffening, but she pressed on, slamming his folder down, pages spilling, falsified logs from the diner. Night, bribe receipts from a downtown dealer, a photo of him shaking hands with a known hate group leader. 16 complaints buried, she said, her tone steel, and a tape of him bragging about cracking a kid's skull. This ends today. She'd copied the tape after Maya's betrayal, a thumb drive now tucked in her pocket, her ace against his lies. She handpicked a team, 3 officers she'd vetted, Sergeant Kim, a wiry Korean vet with a no-nonsense squint, Officer Patel, a rookie with a law degree and a chip on her shoulder, and Lieutenant Voss, a grizzled black cop who'd dodged Travis's clique for years. They raided the records room, pulling files under flickering lights, dust swirling as they unearthed a gold mine, bank stubs linking Travis to cash drops, radio logs placing him near her duplex the night of the mob, a burner phone number traced to Luke Grayson's sister. Nia's shoulder ached, sweat beading on her brow, but she powered through, her team stacking evidence like bricks in a wall to crush him. By dusk, she had enough to sink him twice over, her chest swelling with the thrill of cornering a predator in his own den. She briefed the mayor next, a balding man named Hargrove with a nervous tic, his office a mahogany cave overlooking Stonehaven's skyline, the sun dipping low, casting long shadows across his desk. Nia laid it out, the files spread like a battlefield map, her voice steady despite the pain pulsing in her arm. "Hale's a cancer," she said, tapping the bribe receipts, "corrupt to the core, manipulating the force, targeting me because I won't bend." Hargrove rubbed his temples, his tie loose, his eyes darting to the window where protesters still lingered, signs bobbing faintly in the twilight. "This could clean house," she pressed, leaning forward, her blazer rustling. "Or it'll fester until the city burns." He nodded, slow, reluctant, but greenlit the audit, his signature scrawled on an order she clutched like a lifeline, thinking she'd finally pinned Travis to the mat. Mid-meeting, an alarm shrieked, red lights flashing as a voice crackled over. The intercom, "Bomb threat, evacuate now." Nia bolted up, Hargrove stumbling behind her, the files clutched to her chest as they joined the flood of suits and staff pouring out of City Hall, the air thick with panic. Sirens wailed, fire trucks screeching up as cops cordoned the block, her team scattering in the chaos, Kim shouting something lost to the din. Nia shoved the files into her car trunk, her shoulders screaming, her breath ragged as she scanned the crowd instinct prickling. This wasn't random. The threat cleared an hour later, a false alarm, no bomb found, but when she returned to the records room, the shelves gaped empty, her evidence gone, vanished in the scramble like smoke in a storm. Her stomach dropped, her fists clenching as she realized Travis had pulled the strings, turned her victory to ash. She raced to a press conference, called to counter the viral video, her blazer swapped for a navy jacket, the bandage peeking at her collar as she faced the cameras, Stonehaven's press corps a hungry pack under the precinct's floodlights. "The audit's live," she said, voice firm. "We're rooting out corruption, starting with Officer Hale." She thought she'd reclaim the narrative, rally the city, but Travis crashed in, shoving through the reporters, his dress blues pristine, his scar glinting as he waved a paper, a doctored memo stamped with her signature. "She planted that threat," he bellowed, his grey eyes blazing. "Framed me to cover her own dirt." The crowd gasped, cameras swiveling as he read aloud, lies about her ordering a fake bomb scare, his voice a hammer smashing her words to dust. Nia lunged forward. "That's a forgery!" But the mic cut, static drowning her, the reporters scribbling his version, not hers. Hargrove called her an hour later, his voice tight, clipped. "You're suspended, Nia, pending investigation. Badge on my desk by morning." She stood in her duplex, the paint smears mocking her, the phone slipping from her hand as the weight hit. Travis had flipped her audit into a noose, her evidence stolen, her name smeared again. She'd cornered. Pinned him with hard proof, thought she'd won a decisive blow, but he'd struck back. Ruthless cunning turning her own force against her. She sank onto the couch, the springs groaning, her shoulder pulsing as she stared at the ceiling, the mayor's words echoing, "Suspended." Travis was toasting his vindication at the rusty anchor, clinking glasses with Luke, his laugh booming, over the jukebox as the bar cheered, oblivious to the blood on his hands. She replayed the day, the files in her grip, the mayor's nod, the alarm's shriek, Travis's smug strut. She'd underestimated his reach, his willingness to burn it all down to bury her. The thumb drive in her pocket felt heavy, her last spark. But the precinct was a fortress now, her team scattered, her badge a ghost. Stonehaven spun against her, the press feasting on his lies, the protesters' chants fading to whispers. She'd thought she'd crushed him, thought the audit would be his grave, but he'd turned it into hers, a trap sprung with surgical precision. Her duplex walls closed. In the night pressing down, Travis's victory a chokehold she couldn't break. Not yet. Nia Carter stood in her duplex kitchen, the suspension order from Mayor Hargrove a crumpled wad on the counter, her navy jacket slung over a chair, the bandage on her shoulder peeking out as she gripped a coffee mug, the brew gone cold. Stonehaven. PD had stripped her badge, Travis Hale's doctored memo painting her as a rogue planting bomb threats. the city swallowing his lies whole. The precinct was a locked vault now. Her audit files vanished, her team scattered. But the thumb drive, in her pocket burned hot, Travis's taped confession, her last weapon in a war gone dark. She wasn't waiting for clearance, wasn't bowing to his victory lap at the rusty anchor. She was going rogue, tearing into his underbelly where the law couldn't shield him. She downed the coffee, bitter as defeat, and grabbed her keys, her bruised lip twitching as she stepped into the night, the duplex's paint-smeared walls a silent witness to her resolve. She tracked down Derek Vance, a whistleblower cop she'd met her first week, a wiry 32-year-old with a shaved head and a scar across his knuckles from a brawl he wouldn't talk about. He'd slipped her tips about Travis's dirt, whispers of cash stashes and backroom deals, too scared then to act. She found him at a dive motel on the city's edge, the neon sign buzzing vacancy in flickering pink, his room stinking of stale cigarettes and regret. "I'm out," she said, tossing the thumb drive on his bed, her voice steel despite the arc in her shoulder. "Suspended, framed, but I've got this. Hale's got a stash house and we're hitting it." Derek's hazel eyes flicked to the drive, then her, his jaw tightening as he rubbed his scar. "You're nuts," he muttered, but he stood grabbing a black duffel, his hands steady as he unzipped it, revealing lockpicks, a flashlight, a Glock he didn't explain. "I'm in." They rolled out in Derek's beat-up sedan, the engine rattling as they cut through Stonehaven's backstreets, past pawn shops and boarded-up diners, the moon a thin sliver over the skyline. Travis's stash house sat on a dead-end lot, a sagging warehouse with rusted siding and broken windows, its chain-link fence swaying in the wind. Naya slipped through a gap, her boots silent on the gravel, Derek behind her, his breath fogging. The cold air as they crept to a side door, its lock rusted but intact. He worked the picks, metal scraping until it clicked open, the hinges groaning as they slid inside, the dark swallowing them whole. Flashlights cut through the gloom, revealing crates stacked high, dust swirling as Nia pried one open, her shoulder screaming but her focus razor-sharp. Cash spilled out, crisp hundreds bundled tight, burner phones nestled beside them, their screens dark but alive with secrets. They dug deeper, Naya's hands shaking with adrenaline as she found a ledger, scrawled numbers linking the cash to precinct, names Luke Grayson's sister's phone tied to a drop 3 nights ago, the night of the mob attack. "This is it," she whispered, shoving the haul into Derek's duffel, her chest pounding as she pictured Travis's face when this hit the streets. They moved fast, raiding 3 more crates, piling evidence until the bag bulged, a ticking bomb of truth she'd detonate his world with. She pulled her phone, texting a blogger she'd vetted, a kid named Riley with a site called Stonehaven Uncut, fearless enough to run raw leaks. "Got Hale's dirt. Post it now," she typed, attaching photos of the cash, the ledger, the phones, her signal weak, but the message flying out as they slipped back through the fence, the warehouse a shadow behind them. Riley's post hit at 2 in the morning, Hale's hidden hoard, corruption exposed, the photos blazing across screens, shares, spiking as Nia crashed on Derek's motel couch, her shoulder throbbing, her mind racing with the thrill of striking back. She'd thought she'd exposed him for good, cracked his empire wide open, the city's eyes forced to see the rot she'd bled to uncover. By dawn, the blog racked up 10,000 hits, comments raging, Arrest Hale Now trending as she sipped. Burned motel coffee, Derek pacing, his grin shaky but real. "You did it," he said, clapping her back, the pain flaring but ignored as she nodded, believing it, tasting the wind she'd clawed from suspension's jaws. Then her phone buzzed, a precinct alert, her breath catching as she read, "Officer Derek Vance found dead, alley off 5th. She bolted upright, coffee splashing the floor, her boots pounding as she raced to the scene, a grimy stretch behind a liquor store, police tape fluttering in the dawn breeze. Derek lay sprawled, his throat slit ear to ear, blood pooling black on the pavement, his hazel eyes staring blank at the sky, the duffel gone. Nia stumbled, her knees buckling, a cop shoving her back as she shouted, "He was with me!" "The key?" Officer, a rookie with a buzzcut, smirked. "Step off, lady, this ain't your beat anymore." Crime scene tech swarmed, bagging a knife, but her gut screamed setup. Travis's shadow everywhere. She staggered to her car, the world tilting, when a text hit from a blocked number. "You're next." Her blood froze, the voice in her head screaming. Travis, as she checked her jacket, finding a smear of Derek's blood planted on the sleeve, a frame so blatant it mocked her. She sped back to the motel, locking the door, her shoulder pulsing as she tore off the jacket, the stain a dark omen on the navy fabric. Travis's laugh echoed from that call, low, guttural, a promise of death she couldn't unhear. She'd raided his lair, leaked his sins, thought she'd won a rogue's victory. But he'd struck back savage, precise, turning her ally into a corpse and her into a killer in the city's eyes. She sank onto the bed, the springs creaking, her phone lighting up with news. Chief Carter suspected in cop's murder, the blood smear photo leaked, her name a curse again. Travis hadn't just dodged her, he'd gutted her fight, his retaliation a blade to her throat. Her evidence stolen, her partner dead. She clutched the thumb drive, her last spark, but the motel walls closed in, the night pressing down, his threat a noose tightening with every tick of the clock. "What's your call?" Did Nia's rogue raid prove she still got the guts to take Travis down, or was it a desperate swing that cost too much? Comment number 1 if you think she's a warrior, hitting him where it hurts, and smack that like and subscribe to see if she can outrun his next trap. Or comment number 2 if you reckon she's lost control, digging her grave deeper with every move. Either way, how's she going to survive when the whole city hunts her down? Nia Carter hunched in a motel room on Stonehaven's fringes, the air thick with mildew and the buzz of a dying neon sign outside, its pink glow seeping through the blinds. Her navy jacket lay crumpled on the bed, Derek Vance's blood smeared. On the sleeve, a frame-up branding her a cop killer, the news blaring it on every TV in the city. The screen flickered, her face plastered across channels. Chief Carter wanted for murder, the anchor's voice a drone as grainy precinct photos looped, her bruised lip and bandaged shoulder now marks of a fugitive. Travis Hale had turned her. Raid into a death sentence. Derek's throat slit. The stash house evidence vanished, his threat your next a whisper in her skull. She clutched the thumb drive, her last shard of truth. Travis's taped confession, a faint pulse in a storm. She couldn't outrun. Her shoulder ached, the stitches pulling as she paced, her boots scuffing the stained carpet, her mind racing for a way to flip this nightmare. Stonehaven had erupted, squad cars prowling every block, choppers thumping overhead, their spotlights slicing through the night like knives. She'd ditched her car 3 miles back, hiking through alleys, her blazer swapped for a hoodie scavenged from a dumpster, the hood pulled low over her short-cropped hair. She'd slipped into this motel, cash to a clerk who didn't ask questions. The room a temporary bunker as the city hunted her. She cracked the blinds, peering out, headlights flashing past, sirens wailing a block away, her breath fogging the glass as she pieced together her play. The thumb drive held Travis's voice, his brag about cracking Dion's skull, proof of his rot. But the precinct was a fortress, her allies dead or gone. She needed a voice, someone to blast it wide. So she texted Riley, the Stonehaven Uncut. Blogger from a burner she'd grabbed off Derek's motel table. "Got the tape, need it live now." Riley replied fast. "Meet me at the station, midnight, I'll air it." Nia slipped out, the night cold against her skin, her boots silent on the pavement as she cut through backyards, dodging floodlights, her shoulder throbbing with every step. She reached the station, a low brick building on the east side, its antenna spiking into the dark, Riley waiting by the rear door, a scrawny kid in a beanie, his laptop tucked under his arm. "This better be gold," he muttered, ushering her in, the studio a clutter of cables and blinking consoles. She handed him the drive, her fingers trembling as he plugged it in. Travis's slurred confession crackling through the speakers. "Kid thought he could stare me down, so I showed him pavements harder than his head." Riley's eyes widened, his grin sharp as he hit broadcast, the feed streaming live to his site, piggybacking a pirate signal to every radio in Stonehaven. The audio hit at 12:15, Travis's voice a bomb detonating across the city. Cars. Honking, windows lighting up as listeners caught the truth. Riley whooping as hits spiked. 20,000, 50,000, the feed a wildfire she'd lit from the ashes. Nia leaned against the console, her chest heaving. Thinking she'd cleared her name, turned the hunt back on Travis, the city waking to his sins. She'd outmaneuvered him, slipped his noose, or so she believed, her breath steadying as Riley slapped her back, the pain flaring but ignored. "You're a legend," he said. But the words barely landed before the door crashed open, wood splintering as Travis's crew stormed in, Luke Grayson leading, his lanky frame coiled with rage, a torch in one hand, a Glock in the other. "Burn it?" Luke barked, his voice a snarl as 3 cops fanned out, smashing equipment, sparks flying as Riley dove for cover, his laptop yanked and crushed under a boot. Nia lunged for the drive, but a cop grabbed her, slamming her against the wall, her stitches tearing, blood seeping fresh as she kicked, her boot cracking his shin. Luke torched the tapes, flames licking the console, the confession melting into smoke as he grinned, his patchy beard glinting in the firelight. "Too late, Chief," he sneered, shoving her back as the station filled with heat, the broadcast. Cutting to static mid-sentence, her lifeline snuffed out. Sirens screamed closer, SWAT rolling up, their boots thundering outside as Nia broke free, diving through a side window, glass shredding her hoodie as she hit the ground, rolling into an alley, her shoulder a blaze of agony. She sprinted, lungs burning, the motel 3 blocks off, her last hideout as choppers roared above, their beams raking the streets. She burst in, slamming the door, her breath ragged as she tore off the hoodie, blood streaking her arm, the room spinning. She'd aired the truth, thought she'd won, but Travis's crew had gutted it, turned her strike into ashes. The TV blared. Manhunt intensifies. Carter armed and dangerous, her face everywhere, the city blind to the confessions. Echo! She sank onto the bed, the springs groaning, when bangs rocked the door, SWAT breaching. Tear gas hissing through the broken window, choking the air as shadows loomed. Travis's voice boomed over a megaphone. "No one's saving you now." His tone a gloat, a hunter savoring the kill. Gas stung her eyes, her coughs wrenching her stitches as she crawled, the drive lost, her evidence torched, the city a net tightening around her. She'd flipped the script, thought she'd exposed him, but he'd struck back savage, unstoppable, burning her last play to cinders. The motel shook, boots crashing closer, her vision blurring as she gripped the bed frame. Travis's laugh a ghost in the haze, his victory a chokehold she couldn't break. Nia Carter choked on tear gas in the motel room, the acrid fog searing her lungs as SWAT boots thundered closer. The door splintering under their battering ram, Travis Hale's megaphone taunt, "No one's saving you now," ringing in her skull. Her shoulder bled through the torn hoodie, stitches ripped from the station dive, her bruised lip pulsing as she crawled, the bed frame cold under her grip. The thumb drive was gone, torched with Riley's tapes, her confession broadcast. Cut to static, Stonehaven blind to Travis's rot. She'd aired the truth, thought she'd flipped the manhunt, but he'd burned it down, turned her into prey in a city baying for her blood. Gas stung her eyes, her coughs wrenching her frame as she spotted the bathroom vent, a narrow slot above the sink. Her last shot. She staggered up, boots slipping on the slick tile, and yanked the grate free. Metal clattering as she hoisted herself in, her wounded arm screaming, the duct a tight coffin swallowing her whole. She squirmed through, dust coating her throat, the vent bending under her weight as shouts echoed below, SWAT breaching the room. Their beams slashing the dark, she'd escaped. She kicked out an exit panel, tumbling into an alley, gravel biting her knees as she rolled, the night air cool against her scorched skin. Choppers thumped overhead, their spotlights raking, but she bolted, weaving through back streets, her hoodie snagging on fences, her breath a ragged rasp. She had one play left, Travis's home, a squat ranch house on the south side, his lair, where he'd gloat, oblivious to her counterstrike. She'd end this, record him live, force the city to see his face, not hers, as the monster. She stole a bike from a yard, pedals creaking as she rode, her shoulder leaking red, the streets a blur of shadows and sirens. She reached his place at 3 a.m, a low brick box with a sagging porch, the yard choked with weeds, a squad car parked crooked in the drive. She ditched the bike, creeping through the dark, her boots silent on the grass as she peeked through a window. Travis sprawled on a couch, beer cans littering the floor, his buzz cut glinting under a lamp as he laughed at a muted TV, Her wanted. Poster flickering on the screen. She pulled her phone, the burner from Derek's motel, and hacked the precinct's live feed, a trick she'd learned in her old city, her fingers trembling but precise as she synced it, the signal weak but holding. She smashed a back window, glass crunching under her elbow, and slipped in, the air thick with stale smoke and his arrogance. Travis jolted up, his grey eyes narrowing as she stepped into the light, her hoodie blood-streaked, her bruised lip curled, in a snarl. "Surprised?" she said, voice raw, her phone angled, streaming live as she advanced, his scar twitching as he lunged for a Glock on the table. She kicked it away, the gun skidding under the couch, and grabbed his collar, slamming, him back, her wounded arm shaking but unyielding. "Confess," she hissed, the feed rolling, thousands tuning in. "The mob, Derek, all of it." He grinned, feral, his breath sour as he spat. "You're dead anyway." She punched his jaw, bone crunching, and pinned him, her knee on his chest as he rasped, "Fine, I sent the mob, slit your boy's throat, rigged it all, you're nothing here." The city watched, screens lighting up, gasps echoing in homes as his words hit. A confession ripped from his gut. She thought she'd won, his voice damning him live, the feed spiking to 50,000, 100,000. Stonehaven waking too, his truth, her name cleared in real time. Sirens wailed, feds rolling up, not precinct stooges, their boots storming the porch as Travis thrashed, his grin fading to panic. They cuffed him, his wrists snapping shut, his grey eyes blazing hate. As they hauled him out, Nia sinking to the floor, her phone dropping, the feed still live as she panted, blood pooling from her shoulder. She'd turned the hunt, pinned him in his own den, thought she'd ended it. The city's roar a victory hymn in her ears. Feds patched her up, medics swarming as she stood, her torn hoodie a flag of war, believing she'd broken his spine at last. Then her phone buzzed, a text from Jamal's school. "Fire, get here now." Her heart stopped, the room spinning as she bolted, stealing a Fed's keys, the sedan peeling out, tires screaming as she raced across town, the dawn sky bruising. "Purple?" She hit Lincoln High, flames licking the gym, smoke billowing as kids screamed, teachers herding them out. She found Jamal coughing, ash-streaked, clutching a note pinned to a Molotov shard. "You took mine, I take yours." Her blood froze, Travis's grin flashing from the squad car hours ago, a promise kept even in cuffs. He'd planned it, his loyalists, striking as he fell, turning her win into a gut punch, her son's safety torched in his revenge. She pulled Jamal close, his thin frame shaking against her, the fire's heat searing her skin as she scanned the chaos, cops and feds milling, useless, the note crumpled in her fist. She'd exposed him, thought she'd won, but he'd hit back. Cruel, unyielding, his reach a shadow she couldn't shake. The gym burned, a beacon of his hate, her victory hollow as sirens wailed, her bruised lip trembling with rage she couldn't unleash. Nia Carter stood amidst the chaos of Lincoln High, the gym a roaring inferno, flames clawing the dawn sky as smoke choked the air, her son Jamal trembling against her, his ash-streaked face buried in her torn hoodie. The Molotov note, "You took. Mine, I take yours," crumpled in her fist. Travis Hale's parting shot even as feds hauled him away, his confession live-streamed to Stonehaven's waking eyes. Her shoulder bled through the bandage, the stitches torn wider from the night's fight. Her bruised lip pulsing as she scanned the crowd, teachers shouting, kids coughing, fire trucks screeching up too late. She'd pinned Travis, thought she'd won with his voice damning him on every screen, but his loyalists had struck, torching her son's school, turning her victory into ash. She hugged Jamal tighter, his thin frame shaking, her voice a low growl. "You're safe now," a lie she forced herself to believe as the fire's heat seared her skin. She handed Jamal to a medic, his eyes wide with terror as she kissed his forehead, her boots crunching glass as she stormed back to the feds. Stolen Seddon, the engine still warm. Travis was in custody, but his crew roamed free, a hydra with heads she couldn't count. She sped to the precinct, the streets a blur of red lights and honking horns, her shoulder screaming with every turn, the note a dagger in her pocket. She burst into the lobby, her hoodie blood-streaked, her presence a thunderclap as officers froze, their whispers dying under her glare. "Where's Hale?" she barked, shoving past a desk clerk, her voice raw, unyielding. A Fed, a lanky man with a buzz cut, stepped up, his badge glinting. "Interrogation 3. But you're suspended." "Carter." She ignored him, slamming through the door, her boots echoing on the linoleum as she hit the observation room. Glass walls framing Travis in cuffs, his grin wide, predatory. He sat sprawled, his grey eyes glinting under the harsh light, his buzz cut, casting shadows as he leaned back, unfazed, his scar twitching with every smirk. Nia pounded the glass, her fist leaving a smear, her breath fogging as she stared him down, the Fed trailing her, muttering about protocol. She didn't care. Her, mind-racing, piecing together a sting to trap his crew, end this war. She called Sergeant Kim and Officer Patel, her audit team, their voices crackling over a burner as she laid it out. "Hale's boys hit the school, they'll hit again. We bait them, precinct safe house, fake a leak, catch them live." Kim hesitated, her squint audible. "You're off the books, Nia." But Patel cut in. "I'm in, he's a plague." They met at a gas station, Kim's wiry frame tense, Patel's rookie fire burning as they rigged the plan, Nia's shoulder throbbing, but her focus ablade. They leaked it through Riley's blog, Stonehaven Uncut, a post screaming, "Chief hides." Evidence at Safe House 17, the address a decoy, a crumbling shack on the east side. Wired with cams Nia hacked from precinct stock. She crouched inside, her hoodie swapped for a Kevlar vest. Her bruised lip curled as she watched the feed. Kim and Patel posted outside, their radios silent but live. At midnight, tires screeched. 3 figures in ski masks spilling from a van. Bats and Molotovs in hand. Luke Grayson's lanky stride unmistakable as he kicked the door, glass shattering under his boot. Nia hit record, streaming to Riley's sight, the cams catching every move as they stormed in. Luke's voice a snarl, "Burn it, she's done." They torched the place, flames licking the walls, but Feds swarmed, Kim and Patel leading, cuffs, snapping as the trio thrashed, the feed spiking to 80,000. Stonehaven watching live. Nia stepped out, smoke stinging her eyes, her vest heavy as she faced Luke, his patchy beard glinting in the firelight, his grey eyes blazing hate. "Travis planned it all," he spat, wrists twisting in the cuffs. "School Derek, you're next." The Feds hauled them off, the van peeling out, Riley's blog a wildfire of justice, Hale's crew caught red-handed, the city roaring as Nia sank against a wall, her shoulder leaking red, thinking she'd ended it, crushed his last pawns. By dawn, Hargrove called, his voice shaky. "You're reinstated, Carter. Badge is yours." She drove to City Hall, the say, sun glaring through the windshield, her torn hoodie a trophy as she pinned the brass back on, the mayor's handshake weak but real, her chest swelling with a win she'd bled for. She thought it was over. Travis cuffed, his crew busted, the city hers again, but the precinct buzzed with a new edge. Officers whispering as she walked in, her boots steady, her bruised lip a badge of war. Then a call hit, a Fed on the line. "Hale's transport crashed, he's gone." Her stomach dropped, the room tilting as she gripped the desk, the words sinking in. Travis had escaped, slipped custody on a rural road, a guard's throat slit, the van torched. Evidence surfaced fast, planted tight. A forged log claiming Nia rigged the sting, paid off the Feds, her name a lie again. A grand jury indicted her by dusk, conspiracy to obstruct justice, the papers stamped, her badge a ghost as Hargrove backpedaled. His voice cold. "You're off, Carter, no appeal." She stood in her duplex, the paint smears mocking her. Jamal asleep upstairs. The note from the school fire a weight in her hand as the TV blared, "Chief Carter indicted, Hale at large." She'd trapped his crew, thought she'd won, aired there. Sins live. But Travis had flipped it, his escape a masterstroke, turning her reinstatement into a noose. He'd planted the seeds, his loyalists whispering lies, her sting twisted into a crime she didn't commit. She sank onto the couch, the springs groaning, her shoulder pulsing as she stared at the ceiling. The city's roar a dirge now, Travis's shadow stretching free, her career ash despite the truth screaming in her veins. Nia Carter stood in a Stonehaven courtroom, the air thick with the murmur of a packed gallery, her wrists cuffed behind her torn hoodie, the bandage on her shoulder peeking through as she faced a judge's bench that loomed like a guillotine. Her bruised lip throbbed. Her career ash after Travis Hale's escape. The grand jury's indictment, conspiracy to obstruct justice, a noose tightened by his planted lies. She'd trapped his crew, aired their torching of the safe house live, thought she'd won when Mayor Hargrove pinned her badge back on, but Travis had flipped it, slipped custody, and framed her as the mastermind, her sting twisted into a crime. The gallery buzzed, reporters scribbling, their pens clawing at her silence, cops she'd once led now glaring, their whispers a chorus of betrayal. She stood alone, Jamal in the front row, his lanky frame rigid, his brown eyes locked on her, fear and faith warring in his gaze. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and a gavel worn smooth, read the charges, her voice a monotone blade. "Dahlia Carter, you're accused of orchestrating a false sting, bribing federal agents and aiding Hale's escape." Nia's jaw tightened, her breath shallow as the prosecutor, a slick man in a pinstripe suit, laid out the case, forged logs, and doctored tapes painting her as a rogue, the city's trust a ghost she couldn't grasp. She'd fought Travis tooth and nail, exposed his rot, but he'd outplayed her, turned her victory into a cell, his shadow free while she faced 15 years. Her lawyer, a grizzled public defender named Ellis with a limp and a smoker's rasp, leaned close. "Plead guilty, they'll cut it to 5 and—" But she shook her head, her voice low, fierce. "I'm not folding." She'd lost everything. Badge, home, Derek, but not her spine. The trial dragged, days bleeding into nights, her duplex a memory as she slept in a holding cell, the concrete cold against her back, her shoulder aching with every shift. Evidence, piled against her, witnesses, cops she'd trusted, swearing she'd paid them off, their lies polished by Travis's unseen hand. She sat still, her hoodie swapped for a jail jumpsuit, orange clashing with her bruised skin, her eyes scanning. The room searching for a crack, a spark to turn this tide. Jamal slipped her notes through Ellis, scrawled in pencil. "I believe you, Mum," his faith a lifeline as the prosecution closed, the judge's gavel hovering, her fate a breath away from sealing shut. She thought it was over, the city's roar, a dirge, Travis's laugh echoing from the shadows he'd fled to. Then Jamal acted 16 and fearless, his lanky hands trembling as he sat in his room, the duplex still reeking of smoke from the school fire, his laptop glowing in the dark. He'd hacked Travis's burner from the stash house raid, a number Nia had texted him before the motel siege, her last desperate clue. He cracked it at dawn, the day of sentencing, his fingers flying as audio files spilled out. Travis's voice, slurring through static. "Hargrove's in my pocket, paid him to kill the audit, frame her, she's done." Nia's breath caught as Jamal burst into the courtroom, shoving past bailiffs, his laptop clutched tight, Ellis shouting, "New evidence!" The judge banged the gavel, her silver hair glinting as she snapped, "Order!" But Jamal hit play, the speaker crackling. Travis's confession a bomb shattering the room. The gallery gasped. Reporters scrambling, pens dropping as Travis bragged, "Mayor's my dog, audit's dead, Carter's the fall guy, easy." Then Hargrove's voice, smooth, cold, "She's too clean, plant it deep, I'll sign off." Nia's cuffs clinked. As she straightened, her bruised lip curling into a faint, fierce smile, her eyes locking on the judge as the truth hit, a sledgehammer to the lies. The prosecutor stammered, his pinstripe suit wilting, but the audio rolled, Hargrove's orders tying him to the school fire, Derek's murder, the sting's frame-up, a conspiracy bigger than Travis, the mayor its puppet master. The judge's gavel slammed, "Recess now!" Her voice sharp as she glared at Hargrove in the back, his balding head ducking, his tick twitching wild as feds swarmed him, cuffs snapping on his wrists. The courtroom erupted, chaos spilling as Nia stood, her jumpsuit a badge of war, Jamal rushing to her, his arms around her as the cuffs fell away, Ellis grinning, his rasp a cheer. "You're clear, kid." The audio aired live, Riley's blog piggybacking it, Mayor's downfall, Carter vindicated, hits spiking to 1 million. Stonehaven waking to the real rot, Hargrove's arrest a thunderclap, Nia's name a phoenix rising from ash. She walked free, her boots steady on the courthouse steps, the sun glaring as she breathed deep. The city's roar a hymn now, her badge handed back by a sheepish Fed, Hargrove's empire crumbling in cuffs. She'd lost it all, thought she'd fall, but Jamal's. Hack flipped the board. The mayor's voice the checkmate she'd never seen coming. By dusk, word hit. Travis was dead, found in a ditch off Route 9. A bullet in his skull, his buzz cut, matted with blood. No prints, no gun. A mystery killer silencing his snarl. Nia stood on her duplex porch, the paint smears fading under fresh rain. Jamal beside her, his laptop closed, his grin quiet but real. She pinned the badge on, brass glinting in the wet light, her shoulders scarred but steady, her bruised lip a testament to the war she'd won. Hargrove's cell awaited him, Travis's grave a cold end, but the ditch's silence gnawed at her, a shadow bigger than both, an unseen hand pulling strings she couldn't trace. She stared at the skyline, towers jagged against the dusk. Her, chest tight with victory and dread, knowing someone watched, waiting, her fight far from done. Nia Carter's relentless battle in racist cop attacks black woman in court, without knowing she's his new police chief, reveals profound truths about resilience, justice, and systemic corruption. Her journey underscores that standing firm against racial injustice demands unyielding courage, even when the odds stack high. Nia faced profiling, mob violence, and betrayal, yet her refusal to break highlights a key lesson. Strength isn't just physical, it's the will to fight when hope seems lost. Her son Jamal's pivotal hack teaches that change often sparks from unexpected places, showing how youth and ingenuity can topple entrenched power. Travis Hale's downfall, orchestrated by his own arrogance, proves that unchecked privilege eventually crumbles under its own weight. But his escape and Hargrove's exposure warn that corruption festers deeper than one villain. Systems protect their own until forced to bend. The story also exposes the cost of justice. Nia lost her home, her ally Derek, and nearly her life, yet her victory wasn't clean-cut. Travis's death by an unknown hand and the lingering shadow of a bigger foe suggest that winning battles doesn't always end the war. Vigilance is eternal. It's a call to question who holds power and how they wield it, urging us to peel back the layers of authority. Nia's reinstatement, marred by uncertainty, reflects reality. Progress is jagged, not linear. Ultimately, her tale demands we confront racism head-on, unite against it, and never stop digging for truth, no matter the personal toll. So, what do you think? Can one person truly dismantle a corrupt system? Or does Nia's fight prove it takes a collective stand? Drop a comment with number 1 if you believe in her solo grit. Hit like and subscribe for more gripping tales, and share to spark the conversation. Thanks for joining this journey. Stay bold, stay curious, and keep pushing for what's right.